The Vedas and Puranas are one and the same in purpose. They ascertain the absolute truth, which is greater than anything else. The absolute truth is ultimately realized as the absolute personality of Godhead, with absolute controlling power. As such, the absolute personality of Godhead must be completely full of opulence, strength, fame, beauty, knowledge, and renunciation. Yet the transcendental personality of Godhead is astonishingly ascertained as impersonal. The impersonal description of the Absolute Truth in the Vedas is given to nullify the mundane conception of the Absolute Whole. Personal features of the Lord are completely different from all kinds of mundane features. The living entities are all individual persons, and they are all parts and parcels of the Supreme Whole. If the parts and parcels are individual persons, the source of their emanation must not be impersonal. He is the supreme person amongst all the relative persons. The Vedas inform us that from him, Brahman, everything emanates, and on him everything rests, and after annihilation, everything merges in him only. Therefore, he is the ultimate dative, causative, and accommodating cause of all causes, and these causes cannot be attributed to an impersonal object. The Vedas inform us that he alone became many, and when he so desires, he glances over material nature. Before he glanced over material nature, there was no material cosmic creation. Therefore his glance is not material. Material mind or senses were unborn when the Lord glanced over material nature. Thus evidence in the Vedas proves that beyond a doubt the Lord has transcendental eyes and a transcendental mind. They are not material. His impersonality, therefore, is a negation of his materiality, but not a denial of his transcendental personality. Brahman ultimately refers to the personality of Godhead. Impersonal Brahman realization is just the negative conception of the mundane creations. Paramatma is the localized aspect of Brahman within all kinds of material bodies. Ultimately, the supreme Brahman realization is the realization of the personality of Godhead, according to all evidence of the revealed scriptures. He is the ultimate source of Vishnu Tattvas. The Puranas are also supplementary to the Vedas. The Vedic mantras are too difficult for an ordinary man. Women, Sudras, and the so-called twice-born higher castes are unable to penetrate into the sense of the Vedas, and thus the Mahabharata and the Puranas are made easy to explain the truths of the Vedas. In his prayers before the boy Sri Krishna, Brahma said that there is no limit to the fortune of the residents of Vrajabhumi headed by Srinanda Maharaja and Yasodamai, because the eternal absolute truth has become their intimate relative. The Vedic mantra maintains that the absolute truth has no legs and no hands, and yet goes faster than all and accepts everything that is offered to him in devotion. The latter statements definitely suggest the personal features of the Lord, although his hands and legs are distinguished from mundane hands and legs or other senses. Brahman, therefore, is never impersonal, but when such mantras are indirectly interpreted, it is wrongly thought that the Absolute Truth is impersonal. The Absolute Truth personality of Godhead is full of all opulences, and therefore he has a transcendental form of full existence, knowledge, and bliss. How then can one establish that the Absolute Truth is impersonal? Brahman, being full of opulences, is understood to have manifold energies, and all these energies are classified under three headings under the authority of Vishnu Purana 6.760, which says that the transcendental energies of Lord Vishnu are primarily three. His spiritual energy and the energy of the living entities are classified as superior energy, whereas the material energy is an inferior one, which is sprouted out of ignorance. The energy of the living entities is technically called Kshetrajna energy. This Kshetrajna Shakti, although equal in quality with the Lord, becomes overpowered by material energy out of ignorance, and thus suffers all sorts of material miseries. In other words, the living entities are located in the marginal energy between the superior, spiritual, and inferior, material energies, and in proportion to the living being's contact with either the material or spiritual energies, the living entity is situated in proportionately higher and lower levels of existence. The Lord is beyond the inferior and marginal energies as above mentioned, and his spiritual energy is manifested in three different phases as eternal existence, eternal bliss, and eternal knowledge. As far as eternal existence is concerned, it is conducted by the Sadhini potency. Similarly, bliss and knowledge are conducted by the Sadhini and Samvit potencies respectively. As the Supreme Energetic Lord, he is the supreme controller of the spiritual, marginal, and material energies, and all these different types of energies are connected with the Lord in eternal devotional service. The Supreme Personality of Godhead is thus enjoying in his transcendental eternal form. Is it not astounding that one dares to call the Supreme Lord non-energetic? The Lord is controller of all energies, and the living entities are parts and parcels of one of the energies. Therefore there is a gulf of difference between the Lord and the living entities. How then can one say that the Lord and the living entities are one and the same? In the Bhagavad Gita also the living entities are described as belonging to the superior energy of the Lord. According to the principles of intimate correlation between the energy and the energetic, both of them are non-different also. Therefore the Lord and the living entities are non-different as the energy and the energetic. Earth, water, fire, air, ether, mind, intelligence, and ego are all inferior energies of the Lord, but the living entities are different from all as superior energy. This is the version of Bhagavad Gita 7.4. The transcendental form of the Lord is eternally existent and full of transcendental bliss. How then can such a form be a product of the material mode of goodness? Anyone, therefore, who does not believe in the form of the Lord is certainly a faithless demon, and as such is untouchable, and not to be seen persona non grata, fit to be punished by the Plutonic king. The Buddhists are called atheists because they have no respect for the Vedas, but those who defy the Vedic conclusions, as above mentioned, under the pretense of being followers of the Vedas, are verily more dangerous than the Buddhists. Sri Vyasadeva very kindly compiled the Vedic knowledge in his Vedanta Sutra, but if one hears the commentation of the Mayavada school, as represented by the Shankara Sampradaya, certainly he will be misled on the path of spiritual realization. The theory of emanations is the beginning subject of the Vedanta Sutra. All the cosmic manifestations are emanations from the absolute personality of Godhead by his inconceivable different energies. The example of the touchstone is applicable to the theory of emanation. The touchstone can convert an unlimited quantity of iron into gold, and still the touchstone remains as it is. Similarly, the Supreme Lord can produce all manifested worlds by his inconceivable energies, and yet he is full and unchanged. He is Purna complete, and although an unlimited number of Purnas emanate from him, he is still Purna. The theory of illusion of the Mayavada school is advocated on the ground that the theory of emanation will cause a transformation of the absolute truth. If that is the case, Vyasadeva is wrong. To avoid this, they have skillfully brought in the theory of illusion, but the world or the cosmic creation is not false, as maintained by the Mayavada school. It simply has no permanent existence. A non-permanent thing cannot be called false altogether, but the conception that the material body is the self is certainly wrong. Pranava, Om, or the Omkara in the Vedas is the primeval hymn. This transcendental sound is identical with the form of the Lord. All the Vedic hymns are based on this pranava omkara. Tattvam asi is but a side word in the Vedic literatures, and therefore this word cannot be the primeval hymn of the Vedas. Sripada Shankaracharya has given more stress on the side word tattvam asi than on the primeval principle omkara. The Lord thus spoke on the Vedanta Sutra and defied all the propaganda of the Mayavada school. The Bhattacharya tried to defend himself and his Mayavada school by jugglery of logic and grammar, but the Lord defeated him by his forceful arguments. He affirmed that we are all related with the personality of Godhead eternally, and that devotional service is our eternal function in exchanging the dealings of our relations. The result of such exchanges is to attain prema, or love of Godhead. When love of Godhead is attained, love for all other beings automatically follows, because the Lord is the sum total of all living beings. The Lord said that but for these three items, namely, eternal relation with God, exchange of dealings with Him, and the attainment of love for Him, all that is instructed in the Vedas is superfluous and concocted. The Lord further added that the Mayavada philosophy taught by Sripada Shankaracharya is an imaginary explanation of the Vedas, but it had to be taught by him, Shankaracharya, because he was ordered to teach it by the personality of Godhead. In the Padma Purana, it is stated that the personality of Godhead ordered his lordship Shiva to deviate the human race from him, the personality of Godhead. The personality of Godhead was to be so covered so that people would be encouraged to generate more and more population. His lordship Shiva said to Devi, "In the Kali Yuga I shall preach the Mayavada philosophy, which is nothing but clouded Buddhism in the garb of a Brahmana." After hearing all these speeches of the Lord, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, the Bhattacharya, was struck with wonder and awe and regarded him in dead silence. The Lord then encouraged him with assurance that there was no cause to wonder. I say that devotional service unto the personality of Godhead is the highest goal of human life. He then quoted a sloka from the Bhagavatam and assured him that even the liberated souls who are absorbed in the spirit and spiritual realization also take to the devotional service of the Lord Hari, because the personality of Godhead has such transcendental qualities that he attracts the heart of the liberated soul too. Then the Bhattacharya desired to listen to the explanation of the Atmarama sloka from the Bhagavatam 1.7.10. The Lord first of all asked Bhattacharya to explain it, and after that he would explain it. The Bhattacharya then explained the sloka in a scholarly way with special reference to logic. He explained the sloka in 9 different ways, chiefly based on logic, because he was the most renowned scholar of logic of the time. The Lord, after hearing the Bhattacharya, thanked him for the scholarly presentation of the sloka, and then, at the request of the Bhattacharya, the Lord explained the sloka in 64 different ways, without touching the 9 explanations given by the Bhattacharya. Thus, after hearing the explanation of the Atmarama sloka from the Lord, the Bhattacharya was convinced that such a scholarly presentation is impossible for an earthly creature. Before this, Sri Gopinatha Acharya had tried to convince him of the divinity of the Lord, but at the time he could not so accept him. But the Bhattacharya was astounded by the Lord's exposition of the Vedanta Sutra and explanations of the Atmarama Sloka, and thus he began to think that he had committed a great offense at the lotus feet of the Lord by not recognizing him to be Krishna himself. He then surrendered unto him, repenting for his past dealings with him, and the Lord was kind enough to accept the Bhattacharya. Out of his causeless mercy, the Lord manifested before him first as four-handed Narayana, and then again as two-handed Lord Krishna with the flute in his hand. The Bhattacharya at once fell down at the lotus feet of the Lord and composed many suitable slokas in praise of the Lord by his grace. He composed 100 slokas in praise of the Lord. The Lord then embraced him, and out of transcendental ecstasy, the Bhattacharya lost consciousness of the physical state of life. Tears, trembling, throbbing of the heart, perspiration, emotional waves, dancing, singing, crying, and all the 8 symptoms of trance were manifested in the body of the Bhattacharya. Sri Gopinatha Acharya became very glad and astonished by this marvelous conversion of his brother-in-law by the grace of the Lord. Out of the 100 celebrated slokas composed by the Bhattacharya in praise of the Lord, the following 2 are most important. And these two slokas explain the mission of the Lord in gist. 1. Let me surrender unto the personality of Godhead, who has appeared now as Lord Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. He is the ocean of all mercy, and has now come down to teach us material detachment, learning, and devotional service to himself. Since pure devotional service of the Lord has been lost in the oblivion of time, the Lord has appeared to renovate the principles, and therefore I offer my obeisances unto his lotus feet. The Lord explained the word mukti to be equivalent to the word Vishnu, or the personality of Godhead. To attain mukti, or liberation from the bondage of material existence, is to attain to the service of the Lord. The Lord then proceeded towards South India for some time and converted all he met on the way to become devotees of Lord Sri Krishna. Such devotees also converted many others to the cult of devotional service, or to the Bhagavata Dharma of the Lord, and thus he reached the bank of the Godavari, where he met Srila Ramananda Raya, the governor of Madras, on behalf of Maharaja Prataparudra, the king of Orisha. His talks with Ramananda Raya are very important for higher realization of transcendental knowledge, and the conversation itself forms a small booklet. We shall, however, give herewith a summary of the conversation. Sri Ramananda Raya was a self-realized soul, although outwardly he belonged to a caste lower than the Brahmana in social status. He was not in the renounced order of life, and besides that, he was a high government servant in the state. Still, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu accepted him as a liberated soul on the strength of the high order of his realization of transcendental knowledge. Similarly, the Lord accepted Srila Haridasa Thakura, a veteran devotee of the Lord coming from a Mohammedan family, and there are many other great devotees of the Lord who came from different communities, sects, and castes. The Lord's only criterion was the standard of devotional service of that particular person. He was not concerned with the outward dress of a man. He was concerned only with the inner soul and its activities. Therefore, all the missionary activities of the Lord are to be understood to be on the spiritual plane, and as such, the cult of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, or the cult of Bhagavata Dharma, has nothing to do with mundane affairs, sociology, politics, economic development, or any such sphere of life. Srimad Bhagavatam is the purely transcendental urge of the soul. When he met Sri Ramananda Raya on the bank of the Godavari, the Varnasrana Dharma followed by the Hindus was mentioned by the Lord. Srila Ramananda Raya said that by following the principles of Varnasrama Dharma, the system of 4 castes and 4 orders of human life, everyone could realize transcendence. In the opinion of the Lord, the system of Varnasrana Dharma is superficial only, and it has very little to do with the highest realization of spiritual values. The highest perfection of life is to get detached from the material attachment and proportionately realize the transcendental loving service of the Lord. The personality of Godhead recognizes a living being who is progressing in that line. Devotional service, therefore, is the culmination of the culture of all knowledge. When Sri Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, appeared for the deliverance of all fallen souls, he advised the deliverance of all living entities as follows. The Supreme Absolute Personality of Godhead, from whom all living entities have emanated, must be worshipped by all their respective engagements, because everything that we see is also the expansion of his energy. That is the way of real perfection, and it is approved by all bona fide acharyas, past and present. The system of Varnasrama is more or less based on moral and ethical principles. There is very little realization of the transcendence as such, and Lord Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu rejected it as superficial and asked Ramananda Raya to go further into the matter. Sri Ramananda Raya then suggested renunciation of fruitive actions unto the Lord. The Bhagavad Gita 9:27 advises in this connection, whatever you do, whatever you eat, and whatever you give, as well as whatever you perform in penance, offer to me alone. This dedication on the part of the worker suggests that the personality of Godhead is a step higher than the impersonal conception of the Varnasrama system, but still the relation of the living being and the Lord is not distinct in that way. The Lord therefore rejected this proposition and asked Ramananda Raya to go further. Raya then suggested renunciation of the Varnasrama Dharma and acceptance of devotional service. The Lord did not approve of this suggestion also for the reason that all of a sudden one should not renounce his position, for that may not bring in the desired result. It was further suggested by Raya that attainment of spiritual realization, freed from the material conception of life, is the topmost achievement for a living being. The Lord rejected this suggestion also because on the plea of such spiritual realization, much havoc has been wrought by unscrupulous persons. Therefore, all of a sudden, this is not possible. The Raya then suggested sincere association of self-realized souls and hearing submissively the transcendental message of the pastimes of the personality of Godhead. This suggestion was welcomed by the Lord. This suggestion was made following in the footsteps of Brahmaji, who said that the personality of Godhead is known as Ajita, or the one who cannot be conquered or approached by anyone. But such Ajita also becomes Jita, conquered, by one method, which is very simple and easy. The simple method is that one has to give up the arrogant attitude of declaring oneself to be God himself. One must be very meek and submissive, and try to live peacefully by lending the ear to the speeches of the transcendentally self-realized soul, who speaks on the message of Bhagavata Dharma, or the religion of glorifying the Supreme Lord and his devotees. To glorify a great man is a natural instinct for living beings, but they have not learned to glorify the Lord. Perfection of life is attained simply by glorifying the Lord in association with a self-realized devotee of the Lord. The self-realized devotee is he who surrenders unto the Lord fully, and who does not have attachment for material prosperity. Material prosperity and sense enjoyment and their advancement are all activities of ignorance in human society. Peace and friendship are impossible for a society detached from the association of God and his devotees. It is imperative, therefore, that one sincerely seek the association of pure devotees and hear them patiently and submissively from any position of life. The position of a person in the higher or lower status of life does not hamper one in the path of self-realization. The only thing one has to do is to hear from a self-realized soul with a routine program. The teacher may also deliver lectures from the Vedic literatures, following in the footsteps of the bygone acharyas who realized the absolute truth. Lord Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu recommended this simple method of self-realization, generally known as Bhagavata Dharma. Srimad Bhagavatam is the perfect guide for this purpose. Above these topics discussed by the Lord and Sri Ramanaraya, there were still more elevated spiritual talks between the two great personalities, and we purposely withhold these topics for the present, because one has to come to the spiritual plane before further talks with Ramananda Raya can be heard. We have presented further talks of Srila Ramananda Raya with the Lord in another book, The Teachings of Lord Chaitanya. At the conclusion of this meeting, Sri Ramananda Raya was advised by the Lord to retire from service and come to Puri so that they could live together and relish a transcendental relationship. Some time later, Sri Ramananda Raya retired from the government service and took a pension from the king. He returned to his residence in Puri, where he was one of the most confidential devotees of the Lord. There was another gentleman at Puri of the same Sikhi Mahiti, who was also a confidant like Ramananda Raya. The Lord used to hold confidential talks on spiritual values with 3 or 4 companions at Puri, and he passed 18 years in that way in spiritual trance. His talks were recorded by his private secretary, Sri Damodara Goswami, one of the foremost intimate devotees. The Lord extensively traveled all over the southern part of India. The great saint of Maharashtra, known as Saint Tukarama, was also initiated by the Lord. Saint Tukarama, after initiation by the Lord, overflooded the whole of the Maharashtra province with the Sankirtana movement, and the transcendental flow is still rolling on in the southwestern part of the great Indian peninsula. The Lord excavated from South India two very important old literatures, namely the Brahma Samhita and Krishna Karnamrita, and these two valuable books are authorized studies for the person in the devotional line. The Lord then returned to Puri after his South Indian tour. On his return to Puri, all the anxious devotees of the Lord got back their life, and the Lord remained there with continued pastimes of his transcendental realizations. The most important incident during that time was his granting audience to King Prataparudra. King Prataparudra was a great devotee of the Lord, and he considered himself to be one of the servants of the Lord entrusted with sweeping the temple. This submissive attitude of the king was very much appreciated by Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. The king requested both Bhattacharya and Raya to arrange his meeting with the Lord. Then, however, the Lord was petitioned by his two stalwart devotees. He flatly refused to grant the request, even though it was put forward by personal associates like Ramananda Raya and Sharvabhauma Bhattacharya. The Lord maintained that it is dangerous for a sannyasi to be in intimate touch with worldly money-conscious men and with women. The Lord was an ideal sannyasi. No woman could approach the Lord even to offer respects. Women's seats were accommodated far away from the Lord. As an ideal teacher and acharya, he was very strict in the routine work of a sannyasi. Apart from being a divine incarnation, the Lord was an ideal character as a human being. His behavior with other persons was also above suspicion. In his dealing as acharya, he was harder than the thunderbolt and softer than the rose. One of his associates, Junior Haridasa, committed a great mistake by lustfully glancing at a young woman. The Lord, as Supersoul, could detect this lust in the mind of Junior Haridasa, who was at once banished from the Lord's association and was never accepted again, even though the Lord was implored to excuse Haridasa for the mistake. Junior Haridasa afterwards committed suicide due to being disassociated from the company of the Lord, and the news of suicide was duly related to the Lord. Even at that time, the Lord was not forgetful of the offense, and he said that Haridasa had rightly met with the proper punishment. On the principles of the renounced order of life and discipline, the Lord knew no compromise, and therefore, even though he knew that the king was a great devotee, he refused to see the king only because the king was a dollar and cent man. By this example, the Lord wanted to emphasize the proper behavior for a transcendentalist. A transcendentalist has nothing to do with women and money. He must always refrain from such intimate relations. The king was, however, favored by the Lord by the expert arrangement of the devotees. This means that the beloved devotee of the Lord can favor a neophyte more liberally than the Lord. Pure devotees, therefore, never commit an offense at the feet of another pure devotee. An offense at the lotus feet of the Lord is sometimes excused by the merciful Lord, but an offense at the feet of a devotee is very dangerous for one who actually wants to make progress in devotional service. As long as the Lord remained at Puri, thousands of his devotees used to come to see him during the Ratha Yatra, car festival of Lord Jagannatha, and during the car festival, the washing of the Gundika temple under the direct supervision of the Lord was an important function. The Lord's congregational Sankirtana movement at Puri was a unique exhibition for the mass of people. That is the way to turn the mass mind towards spiritual realization. The Lord inaugurated this system of mass Sankirtana, and leaders of all countries can take advantage of this spiritual movement in order to keep the mass of people in a pure state of peace and friendship with one another. This is now the demand of the present human society all over the world. After some time, the Lord again started on his tour towards northern India, and he decided to visit Vrindavana and its neighboring places. He passed through the jungles of Jharkhand, Madhya Bharata, and all the wild animals also joined his Sankirtana movement. The wild tigers, elephants, bears, and deer all together accompanied the Lord, and the Lord accompanied them in Sankirtana. By this he proved that by the propagation of the Sankirtana movement, congregational chanting, and glorifying of the name of the Lord, even the wild animals can live in peace and friendship, and what to speak of men who are supposed to be civilized. No man in the world will refuse to join the Sankirtana movement, nor is the Lord's Sankirtana movement restricted to any caste, creed, color, or species. Here is direct evidence of his great mission. He allowed even the wild animals to partake in his great movement. On his way back from Vrindavana, he first came to Prayaga, where he met Rupa Goswami, along with his younger brother, Anupama. Then he came down to Benares, Varanasi, for 2 months. He instructed Sri Sanatana Goswami in the transcendental science. The instruction to Sanatana Goswami is in itself a long narration, and full presentation of the instruction will not be possible here. The main ideas are given as follows. Sanatana Goswami, formerly known as Shakara Malika, was in the cabinet service of the Bengal government under the regime of Nawab Hussain Shah. He decided to join with the Lord and thus retired from the service. On his way back from Vrindavana, when he reached Varanasi, the Lord became the guest of Sri Tapana Misra and Chandrasekhara, assisted by a Maharashtra Brahmana. At this time, Varanasi was headed by a great sannyasi of the Mayavada school, named Sri Prakasadana Sarasvati. When the Lord was at Varanasi, the people in general became more attracted to Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu on account of his mass Sankirtana movement. Therefore he visited especially the Vishvanatha temple. Thousands of pilgrims would follow him. Some were attracted by his bodily features, and others were attracted by his melodious songs glorifying the Lord. The Mayavadi sannyasis designate themselves as Narayana. Varanasi is still overflooded with many Mayavadi sannyasis. Some people who saw the Lord in his Sankirtana party considered him to be actually Narayana, and this report reached the camp of the great sannyasi Prakashananda. In India, there is always a kind of spiritual rivalry between the Mayavada and Bhagavata schools, and thus, when the news of the Lord reached Prakasananda, he knew that the Lord was a Vaishnava sannyasi, and therefore he minimized the value of the Lord before those who brought him the news. He depreciated the activities of the Lord because of his preaching the Sankirtana movement, which was in his opinion nothing but religious sentiment. Prakasananda was a profound student of the Vedanta, and he advised his followers to give attention to the Vedanta and not to indulge in Sankirtana. One devotee Brahmana, who became a devotee of the Lord, did not like the criticism of Prakashananda, and he went to the Lord to express his regrets. He told the Lord that when he uttered the Lord's name before the sannyasi Prakashananda, the latter strongly criticized the Lord, although the Brahmana heard Prakashananda uttering several times the name Chaitanya. The Brahmana was astonished to see that the sannyasi Prakashananda could not vibrate the sound Krishna even once, although he uttered the name Chaitanya several times. The Lord smilingly explained to the devotee Brahmana why the Mayavadi cannot utter the holy name of Krishna. Mayavadis are offenders at the lotus feet of Krishna, although they utter always Brahma, Atma, or Chaitanya, etc. And because they are offenders at the lotus feet of Krishna, they are actually unable to utter the holy name of Krishna. The name Krishna and the personality of Godhead Krishna are identical. There is no difference in the absolute realm between the name, form, or person of the absolute truth, because in the absolute realm everything is transcendental bliss. There is no difference between the body and the soul for the personality of Godhead Krishna. Thus he is different from the living entity, who is always different from his outward body. Because of Krishna's transcendental position, it is very difficult for a layman to actually know the personality of Godhead Krishna, his holy name and fame, etc. His name, fame, form, and pastimes all are one and the same transcendental identity, and they are not knowable by the exercise of the material senses. The transcendental relationship of the pastimes of the Lord is the source of still more bliss than one can experience by realization of Brahman or by becoming one with the Supreme. Had it not been so, then those who are already situated in the transcendental bliss of Brahman would not have been attracted by the transcendental bliss of the pastimes of the Lord. After this, a great meeting was arranged by the devotees of the Lord, in which all the sannyasis were invited, including the Lord and Prakashananda Sarasvati. In this meeting, both the scholars, the Lord and Prakashananda, had a long discourse on the spiritual values of the Sankirtana movement, and a summary is given below. The great Mayavadi sannyasi Prakashananda inquired from the Lord as to the reason for his preferring the Sankirtana movement to the study of the Vedanta Sutra. Prakashananda said that it is the duty of a sannyasi to read the Vedanta Sutra. What caused the Lord to indulge in Sankirtana? After this inquiry, the Lord submissively replied, I have taken to the Sankirtana movement instead of the study of Vedanta because I am a great fool. The Lord thus respected himself as one of the numberless fools of this age who are absolutely incapable of studying the Vedanta philosophy. The fool's indulgence in the study of Vedanta has caused so much havoc in society. The Lord thus continued, and because I am a great fool, my spiritual master forbade me to play with Vedanta philosophy. He said that it is better that I chant the holy name of the Lord, for that would deliver me from material bondage. In this age of Kali, there is no other religion but the glorification of the Lord by utterance of his holy name, and that is the injunction of all the revealed scriptures. And my spiritual master has taught me one sloka from the Brihadaranyaka Purana. Harunama, Harunama, Harunamaiva, Kevalam, Kalo Naste Eva, Naste Eva, Naste Eva, Gatir Anyatha. So on the order of my spiritual master I chant the holy name of Hari, and I am now mad after his holy name. Whenever I utter the holy name, I forget myself completely, and sometimes I laugh, cry, and dance like a madman. I thought that I had actually gone mad by this process of chanting, and therefore I asked my spiritual master about it. He informed me that this was the real effect of chanting the holy name, which produces a transcendental emotion that is a rare manifestation. It is the sign of love of God, which is the ultimate end of life. Love of God is transcendental to liberation, mukti, and thus it is called the fifth stage of spiritual realization, above the stage of liberation. By chanting the holy name of Krishna, one attains the stage of love of God, and it was good that fortunately I was favored with the blessing. On hearing this statement from the Lord, the Mayavadi sannyasi asked the Lord what was the harm in studying the Vedanta along with chanting the holy name. Prakashananda Sarasvati knew well that the Lord was formerly known as Nimai Pandita, a very learned scholar at Navadvipa, and his posing as a great fool was certainly to some purpose. Hearing this inquiry by the sannyasi, the Lord smiled and said, My dear sir, if you do not mind, I will answer your inquiry. All the sannyasis there were very much pleased with the Lord for his honest dealings, and they unanimously replied that they would not be offended by whatever he replied. The Lord then spoke as follows. Vedanta Sutra consists of transcendental words or sounds uttered by the transcendental personality of Godhead. As such, in the Vedanta, there cannot be any human deficiencies like mistake, illusion, cheating, or inefficiency. The message of the Upanishads is expressed in the Vedanta Sutra, and what is said there directly is certainly glorified. Whatever interpretations have been given by Shankaracharya have no direct bearing on the sutra, and therefore such commentation spoils everything. The word Brahman indicates the greatest of all, which is full with transcendental opulences, superior to all. Brahman is ultimately the personality of Godhead, and he is covered by indirect interpretations and established as impersonal. Everything that is in the spiritual world is full of transcendental bliss, including the form, body, place, and paraphernalia of the Lord. All are eternally cognizant and blissful. It is not the fault of the Acharya Shankara that he has so interpreted Vedanta, but if someone accepts it, then certainly he is doomed. Anyone who accepts the transcendental body of the personality of Godhead as something mundane certainly commits the greatest blasphemy. The Lord thus spoke to the sannyasi almost in the same way that he spoke to the Bhattacharya of Puri, and by forceful arguments he nullified the Mayavada interpretations of the Vedanta Sutra. All the sannyasis there claimed that the Lord was the personified Vedas and the personality of Godhead. All the sannyasis were converted to the cult of Bhakti. All of them accepted the holy name of the Lord Sri Krishna, and they dined together with the Lord in the midst of them. After this conversion of the sannyasis, the popularity of the Lord increased at Varanasi, and thousands of people assembled to see the Lord in person. The Lord thus established the primary importance of Srimad Bhagavata Dharma, and he defeated all other systems of spiritual realization. After that, everyone at Varanasi was overwhelmed with the transcendental Sankirtana movement. While the Lord was camping at Varanasi, Sanatana Goswami also arrived after retiring from office. He was formerly one of the state ministers in the government of Bengal, then under the regime of Nawab Hussain Shah. He had some difficulty in getting relief from the state service, for the Nawab was reluctant to let him leave. Nonetheless, he came to Varanasi, and the Lord taught him the principles of devotional service. He taught him about the constitutional position of the living being, the cause of his bondage under material conditions, his eternal relation with the personality of Godhead, the transcendental position of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, his expansions in different plenary portions of incarnations, his control of different parts of the universe, the nature of his transcendental abode, devotional activities, their different stages of development, the rules and regulations for achieving the gradual stages of spiritual perfection, the symptoms of different incarnations in different ages, and how to detect them with reference to the context of revealed scriptures. The Lord's teachings to Sanatana Goswami form a big chapter in the text of Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita, and to explain the whole teachings in minute details will require a volume in itself. These are treated in detail in our book Teachings of Lord Chaitanya. At Mathura, the Lord visited all the important places. Then he reached Vrindavana. Lord Chaitanya appeared in the family of a high-caste Brahmana, and over and above that, as sannyasi, he was the preceptor for all the varnas and ashramas. But he used to accept meals from all classes of Vaishnavas. At Mathura and Sanodya, Brahmanas are considered to be in the lower status of society, but the Lord accepted meals in the family of such a Brahmana also, because his host happened to be a disciple of the Madhavendrapuri family. At Vrindavana, the Lord took bath in 24 important bathing places and ghats. He traveled to all the 12 important vanas, forests. In these forests, all the cows and birds welcomed him, as if he were their very old friend. The Lord also began to embrace all the trees of those forests, and by doing so he felt the symptoms of transcendental ecstasy. Sometimes he fell unconscious, but he was made to regain consciousness by the chanting of the holy name of Krishna. The transcendental symptoms that were visible on the body of the Lord during his travel within the forest of Vrindavana were all unique and inexplicable, and we have just given a synopsis only. Some of the important places that were visited by the Lord in Vrindavana were Kamyavana, Adishvara, Pavana Sarovara, Kadiravana, Seshasai, Kelatirtha, Bandiravana, Bhadravana, Srivana, Lahavana, Mahavana, Gokula, Kaliya Hridaya, Dvadasaditya, Kishitirtha, etc. When he saw the place where the rasa dance took place, he at once fell down in trance. As long as he remained at Vrindavana, he made his headquarters at Akruragata. From Vrindavana, his personal servitor, Krishnadasa Vipra, induced him to go back to Prayaga to take bath during the Magha Mela. The Lord acceded to this proposal, and they started for Prayaga. On the way, they met with some Pathans, among whom there was a learned Mulana. The Lord had some talks with the Mulana and his companions, and the Lord convinced the Mulana that in the Quran also there are descriptions of Bhagavata Dharma and Krishna. All the Pathans were converted to his cult of devotional service. When he returned to Prayaga, Srila Rupa Goswami and his youngest brother met him near Bindu Madhava temple. This time the Lord was welcomed by the people of Prayaga more respectfully. Vallabhabhata, who resided on the other bank of Prayaga in the village of Adaila, was to receive him at his place, but while going there the Lord jumped in the river Yamuna. With great difficulty he was picked up in an unconscious state. Finally he visited the headquarters of Vallabhabhata. This Vallabhabhata was one of his chief admirers, but later on he inaugurated his own party, the Vallabha Sampradaya. On the bank of the Dashasvamedha Gata at Prayaga for 10 days continually, the Lord instructed Rupa Goswami in the science of devotional service to the Lord. He taught the Goswami the divisions of the living creatures in the 8,400,000 species of life. Then he taught him about the human species. About them he discussed the followers of the Vedic principles, out of them the fruit of workers, out of them the empiric philosophers, and out of them the liberated souls. He said that there are only a few who are actually pure devotees of Lord Sri Krishna. Srila Rupa Goswami was the younger brother of Sanatana Goswami, and when he retired from service, he brought him with 2 boatfuls of gold coins. This means that he brought him with some hundreds of thousands of rupees accumulated by the labor of his service. And before leaving home for Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he divided the wealth as follows: 50% for the service of the Lord and his devotees, 25% for relatives, and 25% for his personal needs in case of emergency. In that way he set an example for all householders. The Lord taught the Goswami about devotional service, comparing it to a creeper, and advised him to protect the bhakti creeper most carefully against the mad elephant offense against the pure devotees. In addition, the creeper has to be protected from the desires of sense enjoyment, monistic liberation, and perfection of the Hatha Yoga system. They are all detrimental on the path of devotional service. Similarly, violence against living beings and desire for worldly gain, worldly reception, and worldly fame are all detrimental to the progress of bhakti, or Bhagavata Dharma. Pure devotional service must be freed from all desires for sense gratification, fruit of aspirations, and culture of monistic knowledge. One must be freed from all kinds of designations, and when one is thus converted to transcendental purity, one can then serve the Lord by purified senses. As long as there is the desire to enjoy sensually, or to become one with the Supreme, or to possess the mystic powers, there is no question of attaining the stage of pure devotional service. Devotional service is conducted under 2 categories, namely primary practice and spontaneous emotion. When one can rise to the platform of spontaneous emotion, he can make further progress by spiritual attachment, feeling, love, and many higher stages of devotional life, for which there are no English words. We have tried to explain the science of devotional service in our book, The Nectar of Devotion, based on the authority of Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu by Srila Rupa Goswami. Transcendental devotional service has 5 stages of reciprocation. 1. The self-realization stage just after liberation from material bondage is called the Santa or neutral stage. 2. After that, when there is development of transcendental knowledge of the Lord's internal opulences, the devotee engages himself in the Dasya stage. 3. By further development of the Dasya stage, a respectful fraternity with the Lord develops, and above that a feeling of friendship on equal terms becomes manifest. Both these stages are called Shakya stage, or devotional service in friendship. 4. Above this is the stage of parental affection toward the Lord, and this is called the Vatsalya stage. And above this is the stage of conjugal love, and this stage is called the highest stage of love of God, although there is no difference in quality in any of the above stages. The last stage of conjugal love of God is called the Madhurya stage. Thus he instructed Rupa Goswami in devotional science and deputed him to Vrindavana to excavate the lost sites of the transcendental pastimes of the Lord. After this, the Lord returned to Varanasi and delivered the sannyasis and instructed the elder brother of Rupa Goswami. We have already discussed this. The Lord left only 8 slokas of his instructions in writing, and they are known as the Sikastaka. All other literatures of his divine cult were extensively written by the Lord's principal followers, the 6 Goswamis of Vrindavana and their followers. The cult of Chaitanya's philosophy is richer than any other, and it is admitted to be the living religion of the day, with the potency for spreading as Vishvadharma, or universal religion. We are glad that the matter has been taken up by some enthusiastic sages like Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Goswami Maharaja and his disciples. We shall eagerly wait for the happy days of Bhagavata Dharma or Pramadharma, inaugurated by the Lord Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. The 8 slokas completed by the Lord are 1. Glory to the Sri Krishna Sankirtana, which cleanses the heart of all the dust accumulated for years and extinguishes the fire of conditional life and repeated birth and death. This Sankirtana movement is the prime benediction for humanity at large because it spreads the rays of the benediction moon. It is the life of all transcendental knowledge. It increases the ocean of transcendental bliss, and it enables us to fully taste the nectar for which we are always anxious. O my Lord, your holy name alone can render all benediction to living beings, and thus you have hundreds and millions of names like Krishna and Govinda. In these transcendental names you have invested all your transcendental energies. There are not even hard and fast rules for chanting these names. O my Lord, out of kindness you enable us to easily approach you by chanting your holy names, but I am so unfortunate that I have no attraction for them. One should chant the holy name of the Lord in a humble state of mind, thinking oneself lower than the straw in the street. One should be more tolerant than a tree, devoid of all sense of false prestige, and ready to offer all respect to others. In such a state of mind one can chant the holy name of the Lord constantly. O Almighty Lord, I have no desire to accumulate wealth, nor do I desire beautiful women, nor do I want any number of followers. I only want your causeless devotional service, birth after birth. O son of Maharaja Nanda, Krishna, I am your eternal servitor. Yet somehow or other I have fallen into the ocean of birth and death. Please pick me up from this ocean of death and place me as one of the atoms of your lotus feet. O my Lord, when will my eyes be decorated with tears of love flowing constantly when I chant your holy name? When will my voice choke up, and when will the hairs on my body stand on end at the recitation of your name? O Govinda, feeling your separation, I am considering a moment to be like 12 years or more. Tears are flowing from my eyes like torrents of rain, and I am feeling all vacant in the world in your absence. I know no one but Krishna as my Lord, and he shall remain so even if he handles me roughly in his embrace, or makes me broken-hearted by not being present before me. He is completely free to do anything and everything, for he is always my worshipful Lord unconditionally. Chapter 1. Questions by the Sages. Text 1. O my Lord Sri Krishna, son of Vasudeva, O all-pervading personality of Godhead, I offer my respectful obeisances unto you. I meditate upon Lord Sri Krishna because he is the absolute truth and the primeval cause of all causes of the creation, sustenance, and destruction of the manifested universes. He is directly and indirectly conscious of all manifestations, and he is independent because there is no other cause beyond him. It is he only who first imparted the Vedic knowledge unto the heart of Brahmaji, the original living being. By him even the great sages and demigods are placed into illusion, as one is bewildered by the illusory representations of water seen in fire, or land seen on water. Only because of him do the material universes, temporarily manifested by the reactions of the 3 modes of nature, appear factual, although they are unreal. I therefore meditate upon him, Lord Sri Krishna, who is eternally existent in the transcendental abode, which is forever free from the illusory representations of the material world. I meditate upon him, for he is the absolute truth. Purport. Obeisances unto the personality of Godhead, Vasudeva, directly indicate Lord Krishna, who is the divine son of Vasudeva and Devaki. This fact will be more explicitly explained in the text of this work. Sri Vyasadeva asserts herein that Sri Krishna is the original personality of Godhead, and all others are his direct or indirect plenary portions, or portions of the portion. Srila Jiva Goswami has even more explicitly explained the subject matter in his Krishna Sandarbha. And Brahma, the original living being, has explained the subject of Sri Krishna substantially in his treatise named Brahma Samhita. In the Samaveda Upanishad, it is also stated that Lord Sri Krishna is the divine son of Devaki. Therefore, in this prayer, the first proposition holds that Lord Sri Krishna is the primeval Lord, and if any transcendental nomenclature is to be understood as belonging to the absolute personality of Godhead, it must be the name indicated by the word Krishna, which means the all-attractive. In Bhagavad Gita, in many places, the Lord asserts himself to be the original personality of Godhead, and this is confirmed by Arjuna and also by great sages like Narada, Vyasa, and many others. In the Padma Purana, it is also stated that out of the innumerable names of the Lord, the name of Krishna is the principal one. Vasudeva indicates the plenary portion of the personality of Godhead, and all the different forms of the Lord, being identical with Vasudeva, are indicated in this text. The name Vasudeva particularly indicates the divine son of Vasudeva and Devaki. Sri Krishna is also meditated upon by the Paramahamsas, who are the perfected ones among those in the renounced order of life. Vasudeva, or Lord Sri Krishna, is the cause of all causes. Everything that exists emanates from the Lord. How this is so is explained in later chapters of this work. This work is described by Mahaprabhu Sri Chaitanya as the spotless Purana because it contains the transcendental narration of the personality of Godhead Sri Krishna. The history of the Srimad Bhagavatam is also very glorious. It was compiled by Sri Vyasadeva after he had attained maturity in transcendental knowledge. He wrote this under the instructions of Sri Naradaji, his spiritual master. Vyasadeva compiled all Vedic literatures containing the 4 divisions of the Vedas, the Vedanta Sutras or the Brahma Sutras, the Puranas, the Mahabharata, and so on. But nevertheless he was not satisfied. His dissatisfaction was observed by his spiritual master, and thus Narada advised him to write on the transcendental activities of Lord Sri Krishna. These transcendental activities are described specifically in the 10th canto of this work, but in order to reach to the very substance, one must proceed gradually by developing knowledge of the categories. It is natural that a philosophical mind wants to know about the origin of the creation. At night he sees the stars in the sky, and he naturally speculates about their inhabitants. Such inquiries are natural for man because man has a developed consciousness which is higher than that of the animals. The author of Srimad Bhagavatam gives a direct answer to such inquiries. He says that the Lord Sri Krishna is the origin of all creations. He is not only the creator of the universe, but the destroyer as well. The manifested cosmic nature is created at a certain period by the will of the Lord. It is manifested for some time, and then it is annihilated by his will. Therefore, the Supreme Will is behind all cosmic activities. Of course, there are atheists of various categories who do not believe in a creator, but that is due to a poor fund of knowledge. The modern scientist, for example, has created space satellites, and by some arrangements or other, these satellites are thrown into outer space to fly for some time at the control of the scientist, who is far away. Similarly, all the universes with innumerable stars and planets are controlled by the intelligence of the personality of Godhead. In Vedic literatures, it is said that the absolute truth, personality of Godhead, is the chief amongst all living personalities, all living beings, beginning from the first created being, Brahma, down to the smallest ant, are individual living beings, and above Brahma there are even other living beings with individual capacities, and the personality of Godhead is also a similar living being, and he is an individual as are the other living beings. But the Supreme Lord, or the Supreme Living Being, has the greatest intelligence, and he possesses supermost inconceivable energies of all different varieties. If a man's brain can produce a space satellite, one can very easily imagine how brains higher than man can produce similarly wonderful things which are far superior. The reasonable person will easily accept this argument, but there are stubborn atheists who would never agree. Srila Vyasadeva, however, at once accepts the Supreme Intelligence as the Parameshvara. He offers his respectful obeisances unto the Supreme Intelligence addressed as the Para, or the Parameshvara, or the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And that Parameshvara is Sri Krishna, as admitted in Bhagavad Gita and other scriptures delivered by Sri Vyasadeva, and specifically in this Srimad Bhagavatam. In Bhagavad Gita, the Lord says that there is no other Paratattva summum bonum than himself. Therefore, Sri Vyasadeva at once worships the Paratattva, Sri Krishna, whose transcendental activities are described in the 10th canto. Unscrupulous persons go immediately to the 10th canto, and especially to the 5 chapters which describe the Lord's rasa dance. This portion of the Srimad Bhagavatam is the most confidential part of this great literature. Unless one is thoroughly accomplished in the transcendental knowledge of the Lord, one is sure to misunderstand the Lord's worshipable transcendental pastimes called rasa dance and his love affairs with the gopis. The subject matter is highly spiritual, and only the liberated persons who have gradually attained to the stage of Paramahamsa can transcendentally relish this rasa dance. Srila Vyasadeva therefore gives the reader the chance to gradually develop spiritual realization before actually relishing the essence of the pastimes of the Lord. Therefore he purposely invokes a Gayatri mantra, Dimahi. This Gayatri mantra is meant for spiritually advanced people. When one is successful in chanting the Gayatri mantra, he can enter into the transcendental position of the Lord. One must therefore acquire Brahminical qualities, or be perfectly situated in the quality of goodness in order to chant the Gayatri mantra successfully, and then attain to the stage of transcendentally realizing the Lord, his name, his fame, his qualities, and so on. Srimad Bhagavatam is the narration of the Svarupa of the Lord manifested by his internal potency, and this potency is distinguished from the external potency which has manifested the cosmic world, which is within our experience. Srila Vyasadeva makes a clear distinction between the two in this sloka. Sri Vyasadeva says herein that the manifested internal potency is real, whereas the internal manifested energy in the form of material existence is only temporary and illusory, like the mirage in the desert. In the desert mirage there is no actual water, there is only the appearance of water. Real water is somewhere else. The manifested cosmic creation appears as reality, but reality, of which this is but a shadow, is in the spiritual world. Absolute truth is in the spiritual sky, not the material sky. In the material sky, everything is relative truth. That is to say, one truth depends on something else. This cosmic creation results from interaction of the 3 modes of nature, and the temporary manifestations are so created as to present an illusion of reality to the bewildered mind of the conditioned soul, who appears in so many species of life, including the higher demigods like Brahma, Indra, Chandra, and so on. In actuality, there is no reality in the manifested world. There appears to be reality, however, because of the true reality which exists in the spiritual world, where the personality of Godhead eternally exists with his transcendental paraphernalia. The chief engineer of a complicated construction does not personally take part in the construction, but he knows every nook and corner because everything is done under his direction. He knows everything about the construction, both directly and indirectly. Similarly, the personality of Godhead, who is the supreme engineer of this cosmic creation, knows every nook and corner, although affairs are being carried out by demigods. Beginning from Brahma down to the insignificant ant, no one is independent in the material creation. The hand of the Lord is seen everywhere. All material elements, as well as all spiritual sparks, emanate from him only, and whatever is created in this material world is but the interaction of 2 energies, the material and the spiritual, which emanate from the absolute truth, the personality of Godhead, Sri Krishna. A chemist can manufacture water in the chemical laboratory by mixing hydrogen and oxygen, but in reality the living entity works in the laboratory under the direction of the Supreme Lord, and the materials with which he works are also supplied by the Lord. The Lord knows everything directly and indirectly, and he is cognizant of all minute details, and he is fully independent. He is compared to a mine of gold. And the cosmic creations in so many different forms are compared to the objects made from the gold, such as gold rings, necklaces, and so on. The gold ring and the gold necklace are qualitatively one with the gold in the mine, but quantitatively the gold in the mine is different. Therefore, the absolute truth is simultaneously one and different. Nothing is absolutely equal with the absolute truth, but at the same time, nothing is independent of the absolute truth. Conditioned souls, beginning from Brahma, who engineers the entire universe, down to the insignificant ant, are all creating, but none of them are independent of the Supreme Lord. The materialist wrongly thinks that there is no creator other than his own self. This is called Maya or illusion. Because of his poor fund of knowledge, the materialist cannot see beyond the purview of his imperfect senses, and thus he thinks that matter automatically takes its own shape without the aid of a superior intelligence. This is refuted in this sloka by Srila Vyasadeva. Since the complete whole of the Absolute Truth is the source of everything, nothing can be independent of the body of the Absolute Truth. Whatever happens to the body quickly becomes known to the embodied. Similarly, the creation is the body of the Absolute Whole. Therefore, the Absolute knows everything directly and indirectly that happens in the creation. In the Sruti mantra, it is also stated that the Absolute Whole, or Brahman, is the ultimate source of everything. Everything emanates from him, and everything is maintained by him, and at the end, everything enters into him. That is the law of nature. In the Smriti mantra, the same is confirmed. It is said that the source from which everything emanates at the beginning of Brahma's millennium, and the reservoir to which everything ultimately enters, is the Absolute Truth, or Brahman. Material scientists take it for granted that the ultimate source of the planetary system is the sun, but they are unable to explain the source of the sun. Herein the ultimate source is explained. According to the Vedic literatures, Brahma, who may be compared to the sun, is not the ultimate creator. It is stated in this sloka that Brahma was taught Vedic knowledge by the personality of Godhead. One may argue that Brahma, being the original living being, could not be inspired because there was no other being living at that time. Herein it is stated that the Supreme Lord inspired the secondary creator, Brahma, in order that Brahma could carry out his creative functions. So the supreme intelligence behind all creations is the absolute Godhead, Sri Krishna. In Bhagavad Gita, Lord Sri Krishna states that it is he only who superintends the creative energy, Prakriti, which constitutes the totality of matter. Therefore, Sri Vyasadeva does not worship Brahma, but the Supreme Lord, who guides Brahma in his creative activities. In this sloka, the particular words Abhijna and Svarat are significant. These two words distinguish the Supreme Lord from all the other living entities. No other living entity is either Abhijna or Svarat, that is, no one is either fully cognizant or fully independent. Even Brahma has to meditate upon the Supreme Lord in order to create. Then what to speak of great scientists like Einstein? The brains of such a scientist are certainly not the products of any human being. Scientists cannot manufacture such a brain, and what to speak of foolish atheists who defy the authority of the Lord? Even Mayavadi impersonalists who flatter themselves that they can become one with the Lord are neither Abhijna nor Svarat. Such impersonalists undergo severe austerities to acquire knowledge to become one with the Lord, but ultimately they become dependent on some rich disciple who supplies them with money to build monasteries and temples. Atheists like Ravana or Hiranyakasipu had to undergo severe penances before they could flout the authority of the Lord. But ultimately they were rendered helpless and could not save themselves when the Lord appeared before them as cruel death. This is also the case with the modern atheists who also dare to flout the authority of the Lord. Such atheists will be dealt with similarly, for history repeats itself. Whenever men neglect the authority of the Lord, nature and her laws are there to penalize them. This is confirmed in Bhagavad Gita in the well-known verse, Yada yada hi darasya jnani. Whenever there is a decline of Dharma and a rise of Adharma, O Arjuna, then I incarnate myself. Bhagavad Gita 4:7. That the Supreme Lord is all perfect is confirmed in all Sruti mantras. It is said that the Sruti mantras that the all-perfect Lord threw a glance over the matter and thus created all living beings. The living beings are parts and parcels of the Lord, and he impregnates the vast material creation with seeds of spiritual sparks, and thus the creative energies are set in motion to enact so many wonderful creations. An atheist may argue that God is no more expert than a watchmaker, but of course God is greater because he can create machines in duplicate male and female forms. The male and female forms of different types of machineries go on producing innumerable similar machines without God's further attention. If a man could manufacture such a set of machines that could produce other machines without his attention, then he could approach the intelligence of God. But that is not possible, for each machine has to be handled individually. Therefore no one can create as well as God. Another name for God is Ashamardva, which means that no one is equal to or greater than him. Param Satyam, or the Supreme Truth, is he who has no equal or superior. This is confirmed in the Sruti mantras. It is said that before the creation of the material universe, there existed the Lord only, who is master of everyone. That Lord instructed Brahma in Vedic knowledge. The Lord has to be obeyed in all respects. Anyone who wants to get rid of the material entanglement must surrender unto him. This is also confirmed in Bhagavad Gita. Unless one surrenders unto the lotus feet of the Supreme Lord, it is certain that he will be bewildered. When an intelligent man surrenders unto the lotus feet of Krishna and knows completely that Krishna is the cause of all causes, as confirmed in Bhagavad Gita, then only can such an intelligent man become a Mahatma or great soul.